Hello, my name is Clayton Patterson, and I'm here to talk about the LA2 Keith Haring story, Angel Ortiz. Because I'm interested in the history of the Lower East Side, and this is a big part of our history of the Lower East Side. And so I wanted to acknowledge what LA2's contribution was to the Keith Haring legacy, to Keith Haring's art, and his contribution to all of us. Keith sought LA2 out. He looked for him, he saw his tag around, he was really impressed with it, and he wanted to meet him. So he met this young Puerto Rican kid who was about 15 at the time, and then the kid, LA2, Angel Ortiz, quit school and joined the Keith Haring Circus. And the amazing thing is the two of them worked extremely well together. It was like magic. The first piece that they tried to do the collaboration on was apart from a yellow taxi cab, one of those yellow checkered taxi cabs. Keith had dragged the piece home. He worked on it and LA2 worked on it, and Keith then realized that the two of them could work and collaborate together. Now, if you just look at Keith's work, Keith in the beginning was a graphic artist. He was not a fine artist, he was a graphic artist. And once he hooked up with LA2, a very clever graphic artist. I mean, he was able to turn that radiant baby into a figure that could, change. And it was highly creative, but it's still graphics. Once he connects with LA2, and you can clearly see it in the sculpture, it becomes total picture plane is covered, and now it's art. The two of them collaborating together, you now see what looks like a work of art rather than a graphic. So he really changed Keith's whole life and perspective. And LA2 went with him to Japan, he went with him to Italy, he traveled the world with him. And also the other part is that they worked together for several years. It wasn't just a one-time thing. They were a long-time partnership, and can't think of anybody else who Keith collaborated with in that way. LA2 grew up on the Lower East Side, in kind of the inner city part, and he was coming home with all his money. And so his mother got really worried and asked him, Angel, where are you getting all this money from? And then he says, well, there's this white guy, this funny-looking white guy with glasses that asked me to do art with him, and then when he sells something, we share the money. And LA2 was the one that gave him street cred. LA2's crew, TNS, was a real significant crew on the Lower East Side. It was a recognized, acknowledged crew. And the amazing thing with collaborations, like there's a number of collaborations through history. You can look at when, for example, Braque and Picasso first started creating Cubism. A major change in the history of art in the world. But you can tell, an expert can tell which one's Braque and which one's a Picasso. It's, sometimes maybe you need an expert to do that. But they're both acknowledged as contributors to that Cubism. With Keith, LA2 was left out entirely. What you have is you have all of this unattributed work that are actually collaborations. Okay, people, the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you part of my wall here and see if you can discover on my wall which is the LA2. Okay, here I am in my hallway, and I've had different graffiti artists tag the wall. So I'm going to give people a second or two to see if they can pick out which of these tags is LA2. So you can see these tags here, and you can decide. But I think if you take a close look, you realize this is LA2, TNS, LA Rock. So there it is. You too are an expert in how to distinguish some important 20th century fine art from an individual work and a collaboration. LA2, LA Rock, TNS. Not so complicated. You too are now an expert. And I do want to point out that this is, LA2 loves Keith Haring, and he was really appreciative of what it is that how much Keith had changed his life. And I too had lived in the same building as Keith. I was sort of the manager of that building. I had a studio in that building. He took it over, became his studio, and we're fine with that. Keith is not a problem. We both admire what he's done, and that's not the issue. The issue is really the collaboration and acknowledging LA2's position in that. For example, after Keith had died, there was a show at the Whitney, and in the show at the Whitney, there was a painting that had a collaboration between LA2 and Keith Haring. The credit was Keith Haring. So LA2 went up for a walk, to go on a tour, and he asked the tour guide, well, who's this LA2 guy? And she said, oh, he's just some black guy who died. That was, first of all, humiliating to LA2, but he's kind of like a generous soul, and he just brushed it off, and he started doing little drawings for people after he said, I'm LA2. Then the guards came up and asked him and told him he had to leave. So he's got a painting in the Whitney, a collaboration, and he's asked to leave, and he's not acknowledged, and the tour person does not have any knowledge of his contribution. Say, if you go through these books, you'll see some work that is totally LA2's, and he's not acknowledged. Once in a while, he's sort of, like in these large books, he's given like a page of the fact that he worked with Keith Haring. It isn't that he worked with Keith Haring, he made Keith Haring. Keith Haring was a graphic artist until he started to collaborate with LA2. The two of them collaborating together created fine art. They created that Keith Haring look. If you go back through these books and you look at the early Keith Harings, well, actually, what you'll see is, you basically see the Radiant Baby, the Three-Eyed TV, the Barking Dog, and you also see, at times, a pyramid and a UFO. And that's it. Like, how would he have done the sarcophagus, the head of David, the Venus de Milo, or any of those works with just his own drawing around the whole thing? What you have is, you have a collaboration, but it's not acknowledged that it's LA2 and Keith Haring. It's seen as only a Keith Haring. Okay. So we're going to start with a Whitney book, and we'll just give you a quick example. You know, subway work, definitely interesting, but just graphics. It wasn't until he hooked up with LA2 that he got the look. And this is the look. Here you can see the LA Rock, you can see the LA2's signature, LA Rock, and that in this work. But yet it's unattributed. I think LA2 made a really important contribution to 20th century art history. I think he has to be acknowledged. I think he has to be acknowledged as Keith's collaborator and not his work for hire. For people looking at it, it's important for them to know that it is a collaboration. For all those students out there learning about and to identify a Keith Haring, it's important for them to know this is a Keith Haring and this is a Keith Haring and an LA2. Otherwise, art history is a lie. Jeffrey Deitch, the foundation, Tony Goldman, had decided to do a recreation of the Keith Haring original wall on the corner of the Bowery and Houston. That he was really unhappy that they had paid $30,000 for this recreation. And I was sort of instrumental in screwing the whole thing up. Because LA2 came to me and lamented that this whole wall was done as a recreation on the Bowery, and he wasn't part of it. So LA2 came over to me, and what can I do? What can I do? And I said, well, if he wanted to work on the wall, I have a ladder here that's the right size that we could go over there and you could hit it up. So with full intentions of love and no disrespect, we went over there on a Sunday morning and did the recreation. He did the recreation. So he then, all around the original, he started putting his tags and his look. And when the whole thing was finished, it clearly looked now like a Keith Haring. And they looked at this thing for at least an hour, trying to decide what to do. They knew they couldn't just wipe out LA2 because then it would be a major controversy. And the controversy wouldn't be that some artist came over and graffitied it. It obviously now was a collaboration between two people, and they had to acknowledge that. So they had to leave it. It was LA2's, with my help, contribution to the city of New York in helping to acknowledge the history, the legacy, and the importance of the collaboration between these two artists. And that's really what it was. It was a gift. Thank you. Is that all right?